Hello everybody! You may know this channel as Baking and Books, but on this very special April Fool's Day episode, we are taking over the channel and doing things my way. So welcome to the very first episode of Gaming and Gourmet. We're going to talk about video games and make a gourmet meal. So the video game we're going to talk about today is Elden Ring. It is a medieval setted game created by the studio From Software. And because it's more of a medieval theme, we are going to make a meal that's kind of medieval inspired. We're going to do a braised lamb shake and some poached pears for dessert. So this should be pretty fun. Now, I'm going to chop some vegetables like these carrots and onions and garlic, and while I do that, voice in the sky, tell us what Elden Ring's about.
Elden Ring is an open-world RPG co-created by George R. R. Martin and From Software, the guys who pioneered slapping you around with massive enemies and making you say sorry about it. The game is a brand new IP from the studio that takes everything that came before, such as Dark Souls, Sekiro, and Bloodborne, and perfects it, while also moving it to a fully explorable open-world format. There is a whole new cast of incredible characters whose fates interweave around your quest to repair the Elden Ring and become the new Elden Lord. And all new bosses to make every single step of that journey an absolute pain in your ass. Take it away, friend.
Thanks, buddy. All right, so now that we have all of our vegetables and we have our meats, we're ready to get started. So you may notice that the meats are on a plastic plate, vegetables are on a wooden cutting board. The reason for that is that wooden cutting boards are great for chopping things, but you never want to do anything meat related on a wooden cutting board. The wood can actually absorb the bacteria and it can contaminate other foods. Always use plastic cutting boards, plates, whatever, when handling raw meat. All right, so with our lamb shanks, let's get started. We're going to take these over here. So we're going to use this and some oil, heat it up. And we're going to start browning the lamb on all sides. This is probably going to take a while. But while I'm doing this, the first thing that probably stuck out to you about my lovely explanation was the fact that the story is co-written by George R. R. Martin, as you all know, the writer of Game of Thrones series. So George R. R. Martin, actually, his involvement in the Elden Ring series, or the Elden Ring setting, is that he basically wrote the whole Bible for the game, which is pretty cool. So as far as like the setting, plot, characters, you know, some of that, like as far as like how the world works, George R. R. Martin wrote all of that. Then he hands that over to the designers and the directors like Miyazaki from Software, and then they create the quest lines, how the game works, all that sort of stuff. So a lot of what you see story-wise in the game absolutely came from George R. R. Martin, which is really cool. It's really cool to see authors and content creators in general getting involved in other mediums. Especially as a gamer who a lot of the times we feel like people haven't been involved in our mediums and people disrespect gaming as a medium and a form of storytelling, even though we have wonderful game series like The Last of Us, God of War, all that kind of stuff. It's cool to see someone as renowned as George R. R. Martin start to drift into video games and at least writing the plots and stories for one. So it's really awesome to think about. But yeah, from a gameplay perspective, Elden Ring is probably one of the best games I've ever played. Easily one of the best games I've ever played. It's so much fun. They've added so many new things to the From Software formula. And what I mean by that is the very first game that ever came out from Software that reached sort of that big player base would have been Demon's Souls. But the most popular one was Dark Souls 1. And the gameplay loop is walk up to enemy, realize that enemy is going to absolutely kick your ass, get your ass kicked, and then get stronger, figure out how to beat enemy, and keep going. Then you get to bosses who pummel you into the dirt until you like the taste of dirt, and then learn from it. So that's kind of how those games generally go. And so they've added a bunch to the gameplay loop here. For once, it's open world, so it feels like playing Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, especially from like just the gameplay perspective. Feels very similar. Feels very good. And I love a good open world RPG. I mean, I've spent hundreds of hours in worlds like the Elder Scrolls, the new Assassin's Creed games. Like I mentioned, Breath of the Wild, Immortals Phoenix Rising was really fun. Even some MMOs like New World, just like being able to experience an open world is really cool. And so seeing From Software move into the open world area is really exciting. It's really fun, and I believe they've said that this is kind of their blueprint going forward. So to see more open world content from Software I'm super excited. Okay, so now that our oil is warmed up, we're going to start browning the meat. So we're going to take it from this plate, brown it, put it on this plate. So this should be fun. Ooh, it's a little hot. Turn that down. Oh yeah, so this is supposed to be one second. Well, that was aggressive. What was I even talking about? Anyway, so something to note for this is that I went to 2 different stores for lamb shanks, and they didn't have the shanks. So we have the lamb ribs that you see there, and we have some shoulder. So we're going to see how this turns out instead. But I'm sure the amount of times that Lexi's running Audible on you guys has prepped you for this inevitability. But right now we're supposed to just be browning the meat on both sides. Which is happening very quickly. Okay, we're going to do these one at a time this time around, so that I can pay a little bit closer attention to them. So yeah, we don't know if these cooked all the way through. Still want them to be a little bit raw in the middle, because when they simmer for like 2 hours, that's going to be what cooks them for real, but we just want to get them a little bit started. Alright, so what was I talking about? But yeah, open world games. Open world games are fun, and I'm really glad the FromSoft formula is moving into that open world area. I think it's going to be really cool. I think it brings a lot to the table. One of the things that felt super great was the exploration. I mean, like, after resting at a couple sites of grace, you were given Torrent by Melina, and Torrent was your horse ram thing. You know, it had antlers on it, but it was also a horse. So we're just going to keep calling him Torrent, and we're running with that. But yeah, he was your way of getting around. So not only are you traversing the open world on horseback, but there's also these like big springs, and they look like big like air pockets essentially. They're like these big like funnels of air. And if you jumped into the funnel of air, it launched you like to the top of a cliff. So that kind of exploration was really exciting. It kind of gave you a lot of variables and different ways to kind of try some stuff out and try some exploration out. I think there is now more oil on my hands than there is in the pan. So that's going good. All right, so we have our meat. It's been browned. Now, get to move on to our next step, which is we're going to saute the carrots and diced onions until they've been softened. So this should be a little easier. So, now that we have our veggies in, you get them sauteed up. All right. So Elden Ring does a lot of cool things that From Software doesn't necessarily do in some of the older games, which is it teaches you a lot of lessons without necessarily telling you what they are. So the first lesson that Elden Ring likes to teach you is just because you see it doesn't mean you have to fight it. And this lesson is kind of taught in the very first Dark Souls game as far as like encountering the Asylum Demon for the first time. But in Elden Ring, it really starts to ring true because you come out of the tutorial zone, if you even chose to do the tutorial, which you can just miss by accident, and you see this giant knight on horseback called the Tree Sentinel. And he's your first boss. You don't have to fight him immediately. And in fact, if you're a newer player to the game series, you shouldn't. Veterans may be able to approach him and just be like, yeah, I'm gonna kick your butt. Like, you're done. This is it for you. But newer players, man, it's gonna be rough. I remember I was just admiring the open world, just kind of walking around, doing my own thing, and then all of a sudden, I hear boss music, and that guy destroyed me. I didn't have a chance. I didn't have a fighting chance. And it's just cool. So you decide to, explore the open world, go around, get a little stronger, come back, and then you kick his butt. Or you realize that you didn't get strong enough, and he still absolutely destroys you. So, it's always a good time. It's always a great time. The second lesson that it teaches you is posture breaking. And back in the older games, there was parrying and backstabbing. That was really the only two things. So you could parry attacks, or you could backstab unaware or opponents that you were able to circle around behind. But in this, they added staggering. Now, that is like using heavier attacks or certain weapons had more poise-breaking abilities, where you could actually stagger the boss or the enemies and get a critical off that way. And it kind of really changes the way that you play the games. Like, you do a lot of like jumping attacks because they break poise better. But then they also added crouching, which allows you to stealth and actually sneak up behind enemies instead of just having to walk around them and try to get them in the back. So generally by a rule of thumb, stabbing things in the ass does a lot more damage, and we like that. The last thing that it teaches you is that eventually, if you bash your head against a brick wall hard enough, you will make your way through the wall. Now, it's debatable on what kind of issues you're going to have when you get to the other side of the wall, but you'll have gotten through the wall. Now that brings us to story. The story, like most From Software games, is really hard to follow the first time around. You're usually presented with some sort of like, you are this X character, and you are just supposed to go break the cycle. And that's kind of the same thing with Elden Ring. So you're tarnished. You're not from the Lands Between, which is where the story takes place. You come to the Lands Between in order to try and find and mend the Elden Ring, because the entire land has been thrown into madness and basically like a blight because the Elden Ring was broken. You start to learn certain things like that the world used to be governed by something called the Golden Order, and you think, oh, well, the Golden Order, that was a good thing, and then the breaking of the Golden Order that's what caused all the pain. But then you start to realize through, interacting with characters and reading, overhearing like certain things that are talked about, that the Golden Order might not necessarily have been good. and that the demigods and gods that were in charge were actually abusing the Golden Order for their own good. There's actually a whole quest line that deals with the Golden Order, because one of the possible endings that you can choose has something to do with the Golden Order. And that's also one of the cool things, is that in a lot of these games you can choose your own ending. So in the first game, you could choose to light the bonfire and become the new Lord of Flame, or whatever that was, which basically started the cycle all over again. Or you can just walk away and cast the world into darkness and see what happens. And it's always debatable on like what's the good ending and what's the bad ending. So that's one of the ending choices. There's total 6 ending choices. And if you don't want any spoilers, then I would suggest coming back in a few seconds. But the ending that I chose was with Ronnie, the witch. And Ronnie is cool because she, when the Elden Ring was broken, she took one of the shards and basically cast away her physical form, and her consciousness is inside of like a puppet, essentially. So it's like this 4-arm puppet, and you can see like strings kind of holding it together. It's really cool looking, honestly. But her storyline, you end up finding out that she was the one that orchestrated the assassination through the Black Knight assassins, and assassinated, I want to say it's Radagon, assassinates Radagon, and is the reason why the Elden Ring is fractured, and casts the whole land into the Blight. Which is really, at first you're like, oh, so she's the villain. But I think she's more of the hero, because she sees that the Golden Order and the gods are abusing their power, and the only way to fix it is to break the Elden Ring and basically cast everybody aside. So then she's trying to create her own order, and she wants the order to exist outside of the realm of mortal beings. Like, she doesn't want people to be able to access it, kind of like how the Elden Ring was accessible to people. She doesn't want it to be accessible. She wants it to be outside of the realm of accessibility. So you can help her go on this quest. You help her kill her 2 fingers, and 2 fingers are literally just these massive, like, 2 fingers that are like 2 stories tall or whatever, and several people have 2 fingers that are a part of them, or like they're part of their fate or their destiny. And so she goes on a quest to kill hers, and at the end she brings on the Age of Stars and creates this basically new world that doesn't have a deity or a god for the first time. It's left to completely govern itself, which I actually think is the good ending. I think it's probably the best ending that you could get, because a lot of the other ones are just restarting the cycle, but sometimes you're restarting the cycle but things are worse. Like restarting the cycle and there's just a mist, or like a land of fog, and death is everywhere, or there's like a pestilence ending where there's just like a virus taking hold of everything, or there's the frenzied flame ending where madness basically takes over and the entire world dies. Or you can perfect the Golden Order, which, you know, potentially sounds like a good thing, but it could be removing people's free will, and that's how it's perfected. So you never really know. Like, lots of crazy things can happen. But ultimately the player gets to pick those things, which is really cool. So we're going to add our garlic now. Let it cook for a bit. So yeah, I mean, Elden Ring has been wonderful. It's been an absolutely enjoyable experience. I wanted to put my head through a wall multiple times with some of the bosses that I went up against. One thing that's just like the bane of my existence is duo fights. So they put you up against 2 bosses. But to counteract the sheer number of duo fights they've added in this time around, they've added some other new stuff to the combat systems, which is there's Ashes of War, which are basically weapon abilities that you can use. That some of them are really cool. Some of them, they call it the Sonic the Hedgehog build, where you literally are a rolling ball of lightning that kills things. So you have, you know, various of those to use at your disposal, and some of them are crazy overpowered, some of them really suck. But then you also have Ash Summons that allow you to summon things in and fight with you, which is a huge blessing, especially if there's a duo fight, because, I mean, when you don't have two things focused on you, and instead just one thing is focused on you, it's 10 times easier. And I won't lie, I use the Mimic, which is a summon that copies everything that you're wearing and have equipped, and does the same things as you. And Mimic is, I mean, simply put, he's incredible. Like, the Mimic is probably the best, it might be easily the best, and it's even been nerfed. Like, they went in afterwards and made it worse, and it's still super strong. The build I ended up doing was like a bleed build, which I know if you're a big fan of the series, and you hear someone saying that they did a bleed build, and you roll your eyes. But Mimic with the bleed build, you're both stacking up bleed at the same time, it was so cool. It was so much fun. You did so much damage. So yeah, I have beaten the game. I did Ronnie's quest line. I thought it was great. I thought it was super cool. There's a lot of twists and turns in it. It's really exciting. Yeah, I started a New Game Plus playthrough, and I've already been playing through New Game Plus. And I thought it was interesting. I was expecting New Game Plus to be way harder, but I have gone through probably what took me 50 hours to do in like 10 hours, easily. Maybe it's because I know things that I didn't know beforehand. I know who all the bosses are. I know how to stagger them. I know how to do the best damage against them. But I mean, I am flying through it. And I expected it to be much more difficult when it got to it. But here we are. Alright, so we want to return the shanks back into the pot now that the garlic has cooked. So we're going to throw these back in. Not shanks, the ribs and shoulders. And it wants us to sprinkle with flour. So we're going to take a 1/4 cup of flour. Sprinkle that in there. Cook for 4 to 5 minutes to brown. It should already be brown. So we'll come back when that's done. Alright, so it's been a couple minutes. It's starting to stick to the bottom some. So I'm thinking that's mean it's browning. Maybe it got too hot. But it's time to add in our liquids. So this recipe calls for a Chianti or a Merlot, but I had a Petite Syrah, a little bit more accessible, so we're going to use that instead. So we're going to pour in 1.5 cups of red wine, which I think is going to end up being the rest of the bottle. And then we're going to also put in beef stock, 2 cups of it. 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. Where did my tablespoon go? And a sauce. $14 ounces, 15-ounce can, should be an issue. And some beef bouillon. I think that's how that's pronounced. Or no, never used beef bouillon before. That is thick. What the heck is this stuff? We need 2 bay leaves. And some rosemary. We only need a teaspoon of fresh rosemary. But I like rosemary. Okay, so now we need to cover this and bring it to a boil. Let's bring it to a boil. I'm going to try and stir it a little bit up, mix it up a little bit. So, and we wait till it boils. Alright, we have a nice boil going, so Got our lid. We're going to cover it and take it down to a simmer. That smells really good. All right. Well, now we wait. It's good shit. Well, it wouldn't be baking in books without a little bit of dessert, so we're going to start working on our spiced poached pears. This has been in for about an hour now, so we're closing in on being done, so hopefully by the time that the pears are done, then we will also have this done. This is also going to go on top of some mashed potatoes. I did not feel like making my own mashed potatoes, so we will be using instant mashed potatoes, and you can fight me about it. Alright, so the first thing we're going to need is a cup of water, then a cup of wine. Then we've got some lemon juice. It wants 2 tablespoons, but we could probably just do a whole lemon and it'll probably be fine. Next we've got a cup of sugar, 1 cinnamon stick. I kind of like cinnamon, so I'm gonna do 1.5. Then we've got a teaspoon of allspice. We're very adamant about whole allspice. Now with that, we can bring this to a boil. So we're gonna turn that up pretty high. And then we're also going to end up simmering this. So while I'm here, we're going to talk a little bit about Elden Ring again. Elden Ring has gotten a little bit of flack, and I think it's getting flack for the wrong things. People tend to not like From Software games because they don't hold your hand at all. And, you know, that's understandable. Sometimes people need to be directed or need a sense of direction when progressing through a video game. If you just let them go of their own accord, they're going to get a little bit confused. But From Software has never been like that. They've always been more of like a, hey, here's kind of your general direction that you need to go, and figure it out. I think it's really refreshing in a game. And this even more, like with Elden Ring, it doesn't hold your hand at all. Like we were talking about with the Tree Sentinel flight earlier, like it provides a boss fight for you right out of the gates. And you can fight it if you want, and you're probably going to regret fighting it. You're going to get beaten down, and you're not going to enjoy your life. It also doesn't necessarily tell you where to go. It just kind of points you in the right direction. So one thing that's kind of cool is when you rest at a site of grace, a lot of them have these kind of like pointers that are pointing in a particular direction. It's just like, go that way. And that's kind of the most hand-holding they do, is like, you should be going this way. Like, to progress the story and to get past this area, you should be going this direction. And you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that that was the right, that that's where you need to be immediately, but it means that, you know, if you want to keep getting further, then you should be here. This is your goal. And like I said earlier, it is refreshing to just be like, to be handed an open world and just say, go. A lot of things, like, you're just gated. And with this, it's like, certain enemies in certain levels are much stronger, and you're intended to be there much later. But if you have the perseverance and the willpower, you can make it through it. You're not going to enjoy your life while you're doing it, but you can make it through it. And that's kind of the beautiful thing about these games, is that you are the only person holding you back in a lot of the ways. So it's like, once you learn enemy moves and enemy mechanics, you can dodge, get out of the way of attacks, and you can make it past. And it's really nice in that respect that you can kind of do that sort of thing. I think one of the other complaints that it gets is that it's too hard. At times I agree with it, at times I don't. One of the things that pulled me out of Bloodborne was you had this insane difficulty spike about halfway through the game, and it was really hard to continue because it was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna have to brute force my way into this over and over and over again until I figure it out or get good, and it kind of lost me. And there was a point in Elden Ring where I was afraid of that happening. Like, things were doing so much damage. It was so hard to stay alive. It felt like every basic mob was going to murder me. And I was starting to get those flashbacks. But then I got the right weapon. I got my stats up a bit. And it ended up being fun. I beat Millennia, the Blade of Miquella, which is referred to as one of the hardest bosses in the game, in 4 attempts. Granted, I used the Mimic for it and a bleed build, which people are probably going to frown at, but I did it. Like, I legitimately did it, and it's worth the pain. Weird to say that, but it's worth the pain sometimes. Now that we have this at a boil, we can simmer this too, but we're not going to simmer this for near as long. We're only going to simmer this for about 5 minutes. So while that simmers, I'm going to peel pears. Okay, so we have had this simmering for about 5 minutes. A little longer than that, actually. So now we can pour this into our bowl with our pears. Take our pears, put them in an oven-safe bowl, and we want to make sure that the syrup covers the pears, or else they won't cook properly. So as you can see, the pears aren't totally covered, but I feel like if we turn them once or twice while they're in the oven, they should be okay. So a couple final thoughts about the game. From Software has had a history of putting in very annoying and obnoxious enemies into their games, most notably from the Dark Souls series and Bloodborne. There are dog enemies, and the dogs, they have the weirdest and fastest attack patterns. They're so wonky, it feels like every time you die, they're involved in some way, shape, or form. Elden Ring kind of upped the ante a bit, so you have the regular dogs that like to ruin your day and ruin your life. You have wolves, and they're actually not too bad. But then they added in some bird enemies. And these bird enemies, they really made me think that people who are afraid of birds are onto something. Because, oh my goodness, I struggled against any enemy that was a bird for the longest time. It was so atrocious. But that's part of the difficulty of the game, and, it's part of what's fun about it. And a little bit more on the difficulty. I am 100%, and I don't try to hide it. I'm a rage gamer. I yell, I huff and puff, I get mad, and that's just me. I yell, power through it a couple times, put my head in my hands, regret choices, then I get back at it, and I beat it. And then I'm like, yeah, I did that. I'm better than you. And I like to forget about all the times that I got absolutely brutalized by the boss, like 100 times before that. But what's important is that I beat it, and now I have the bragging rights, and they don't. But I'm not alone, as you can hear right now.
Oh my god, I'm literally running out of it. Dude, come on! Come the fuck on!
So it's not just me. It's everybody. Everybody who plays a From Software game at one point in time will sound like that and make that. It just happens. But it's part of the beauty of it. So, would I recommend Elden Ring? I would say yes, but, and I'll explain. I think people who like games like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild will potentially find some aspects of Elden Ring that they like and will be able to get into it and might be able to overcome a lot of the difficulties, because there are some pretty hard fights and some pretty hard encounters in Breath of the Wild, like those lion centaur guys. Man, they're rough. They are rough. But it's really, really rewarding to finally be able to overcome them. And so I think a lot of Breath of the Wild fans can find some sort of similarity with that with Elden Ring. And then obviously anybody who's ever played a From Software game and really loved it, they'll fit right in. They'll absolutely just enjoy the game and adore the game. I think they'll really start. They'll really love it. Casual gamers, no. Mobile gamers, no. People who are just there to, like, enjoy the story of something, probably not. From Software's games tend to have some storylines that can be pretty hard to follow. A lot of the writing for the story is also done in Japanese and then translated to English, and there have been some instances of things being lost from translation. Dialogue tends to sound cryptic sometimes, so for people who are like into a really, really good story, and that's kind of what they look for when they play games, they might want to pass on Elden Ring. But for someone who loves diving into a new game, especially an open world experience, who loves diving into something that's like really, really lore rich, even though you have to search for it, I think that this is definitely their game. If they're more of a casual gamer and they like those things, it'll be a little rough, but I think they can do it. Or at least they can get pretty far. And we'll see.
It's starting to look pretty good. Look at that. Coming off the bone pretty nice. We can come down here and check on our pears. Looking good.
Okay, so this has been going for about 2 hours now. It's looking like it's done. Our pears have also been in for about 20 minutes. We'll probably let them go a little bit longer while we get the rest of this situated. We're also going to go ahead and make our instant mashed potatoes. So we're going to throw this in the microwave for 4 to 5 minutes. Now, it wants us to take our lamb out. So we're going to put them into a bowl. Some of it is already fallen off the rib, so we're pretty confident that it's done. I'll start taking these out. Oh, that's on my hand. Oh god, that hurts. Woo. Ow. Woo. Okay, I think that's all of the meat. Some of it might have fallen off and gotten lost in the bottom, so we'll see. Not outside of the realm of possibilities. Let's take a look at that. That looks good. Alright, let's go ahead and also take out our pears. Well, I've never made a poached pear before, so I'm not sure how to necessarily tell if these are done, but they look good. Let's see if we can get one of these pears onto a plate. Flying around a lot. And that's our mashed potatoes done. All right. Let's check out this pear. Ooh. I do not think these got all the way poached. Well, that's what happens when you cook something for the first time, right? Yeah, these definitely needed to probably be submerged a little bit longer. It just feels kind of like a regular pear. So the pears didn't work. That's okay. But they still might taste good, so we'll find out. All right, let's prepare our main dish, though. So, get some mashed potatoes. Get some of our lamb going on here. Let's try and get some of those carrots out of there. There you go. That is a braised lamb and mashed potatoes. It looks good. All right, guys. That has been the first and potentially only episode of Gaming and Gourmet. I hope you enjoyed it. And for my parting words about Elden Ring, it's great. I loved every second of it, even the points when I was angry. And, oh, yeah, fuck birds.